Hello and welcome to Call to the Workforce. My guest today is Abby Croshaw Chipman. Abby has a bachelor's degree in statistics and an MBA focused in finance. She worked at the U.S. Census Bureau as a statistician analyst for 3 years, and during her MBA did an internship at a microfinance bank in Kenya. She then worked for Fidelity Investments as a financial representative and then relationship manager working with high net worth clients. During her time at Fidelity, Abby also obtained her certified financial planner license. So Abby actually left the workforce when she became a mother and has been very active in the unpaid workforce. For the last 4 years, she has volunteered as treasurer for her children's cooperative preschool, where she has actively been involved in managing the school's finances, accounting. She's helped with hiring and salary decisions, and also worked with other members of the leadership to navigate COVID and other decisions, and was recently asked to step into the role of president next year. She also has a small business where she provides bookkeeping, financial planning, and analysis services. She works part-time as the finance director for 3 and 30, a small business that supports mom, where she's on the executive team. And fun fact, Abby has run 30 half marathons. She has 4 kids. And yes, we do share the same last name. She is married to my brother. Welcome to the podcast, Abby.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Well, it was so kind of you to come on and be willing to come on for this conversation. As I thought about topics that would be really good, one of the things that occurred to me is that sometimes the professional development we're doing, we think it has to happen at work. And yet many times, a lot of the things that are happening in life can provide really wonderful opportunities for professional development as well. And with that, we're going to jump right in because, as we mentioned, you are in this treasurer role. It's unpaid, and yet you've been dealing with COVID. There are staffing and contracts and hiring and all sorts of things. And communication in challenging moments is really a key area that I have watched you navigate and seen you develop so many skills around. Would you take us into and share with us some of the examples of the communication that has been required of you, even though it's an unpaid role?
Sure. There's really 3 stories that are coming to mind for me. One is that this treasurer, I've been doing it for a long time, and there's another organization that's related to our school, and I was recently asked by them to take on an additional role by this organization, and I don't have the bandwidth for more. Doing a little bit right now, and I can't do more. And so I had to really figure out how to say no to this person without burning any bridges, because who knows, I might want to do something with them later. But that was something I had to figure out. Like, how do I turn this down in a way that is going to work out well for me? And there's this thing called a love sandwich that I've learned about that I had to use for that. And it's basically like you say kind, good things on both sides of the bad news. So you kind of sandwich it in. So when it came to this, when this request was made for me, I basically told them, thank you so much. I really appreciate this offer. I have no extra bandwidth right now to add another thing to my plate, but I really appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing to work with you in the ways that I can. And I have ended up helping them in little side ways that don't take up nearly as much of my time as I would have had to give if I'd owned the whole role. So that was one example that I thought of. Another is that when you're working in a work environment, especially when COVID was happening, it was hard to communicate with everyone because in part, we're just not all together all the time like we used to. We're communicating over Zoom. Things are different. Everybody's a little distracted. It was often tricky with communication patterns. Things were getting delayed. There was information that should have been given to members of the staff that just weren't given in a timely way. So then when it came down to it, when we realized that things were kind of getting lost, we had to think about, how do we now have these conversations that should have been had months and months ago? And how do we backpedal now and get into that?
And that was such a sticky situation for so many companies, right? I mean, nobody thinks, oh, this year we're going to have an unknown pandemic that's going to hit the world and everything will shut down. It's a great example because we don't always know what's going to hit. And sometimes things hit and we all of a sudden are scrambling, trying to figure out what do we need to communicate and how do we do it? And sometimes things do get delayed. So what did you do in that scenario? And what did your leadership team do?
Well, so there's a book that I really love. It's called Five Dysfunctions of a Team. It's by Patrick Lencioni. And he talks about these five things that teams do that can just make them break down and not be functional. And one of those dysfunctions is fear of conflict. And this completely was coming into play for us in this situation because it's not like we could be giving them happy, nice information. It was, hey, oops, we messed up. Here's something we had to do. And the thing he talks about when you're dealing with this is to enter the danger. So get yourself in a position, whatever you need to do, have those hard conversations. And it takes a lot of hyping up yourself before you go into it. But I think we really had to make sure that we had a clear picture of the outcome that we wanted going into it. So that when that conversation happened, if there was pushback, we knew what the line was before we ever got close to it. So
So I'm dying to know how you hyped yourself up for these.
well, I wasn't the one that had to have the conversation. But for me, I feel like I need to get my body moving. I might do jumping jacks or things like that before I sit down and have it, just so that I get my heart rate up, and that kind of helps me.
You do have a lot of tough conversations as part of your role as you've done these things. So, how have you prepared yourself to get into those really hard conversations? One of the things that I've noticed is that many times it's the anticipation of the tough conversation that is the scariest. It's the stories in our mind of how are they going to respond? You can almost get into this idea where you've built 10, 15 different scenarios. And usually we're thinking of it from the threat perspective of what will go wrong, as compared to thinking, we're going to send this message and people are going to say, oh, thank you for sharing that. That was just wonderful. If we thought that, we'd enter every conversation easily. So how, as over the last few years, as you have had to have these hard conversations, how have you prepared for those moments?
One thing that I do, not even just when I'm preparing for those moments, but just on a regular basis, I feel like there's a way I can exercise my brain in advance so that, because when you get into those moments, your amygdala kind of shuts down the part of your brain that is reasoning and logic. So I feel like it's good to kind of practice how to keep your brain calm so that you have something to grab onto when that happens. So I actually have a reminder in my phone that goes off once or twice a day that basically reminds me to practice, take a deep breath, or things that will calm me so that when I'm in that moment, the muscle memory will just kick in all by itself. And I have to use that at work. I have to use that with my kids. It applies all over the place.
You're also really good about setting boundaries from what I've observed. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but and a lot of these conversations are boundary conversations. That's probably why I think that. So as you think about setting those boundaries, what has setting boundaries looked like?
I think it's really important to think about what a boundary is. A boundary is what I'm going to do. A boundary is not what I expect other people to do. They're going to do what they do. A boundary is, if this situation happens, here is going to be my response. I think just having a clear idea of that. I am not controlling anybody. I can only control me. And I think knowing that, it's really important to be okay with the fact that sometimes people are not going to like your boundaries. And that's okay. It's okay for other people to be uncomfortable with your boundaries if it's an important boundary to you. And I think just getting myself to that place has made it a lot easier to make and hold the boundaries that I've needed to hold, because I need to take care of me.
And you have had professionally, you have had to make some really, really tough decisions. I think by now we all know that COVID and all the circumstances really required some muscle building or some new skill areas. Can you talk about some of the challenges that you faced in making those tough decisions?
Yeah. I started in this treasurer role right after COVID hit. And the world was still scrambling to figure out what does everything look like now. And we had to come up with a policy for how everyone would be expected to behave, what everyone was expected to do to come to the school. And that's really tricky because there as are a lot of feelings that everybody has about COVID and how is a proper way to when you're in the middle of pandemic. We all know about this kind of stuff now. So we had to navigate how to work with people, knowing that whatever we chose, some people were not going to be okay with it. No matter what we chose, it was impossible to please everyone. So it was a really hard time to be making decisions when everyone had so much emotion behind it.
So, knowing that there were people, we don't normally worry too much when somebody says, "Oh, I'm thrilled with your decision." Great, let's go. Let's move on at this point. But how did you support the people who were unhappy, knowing that you're holding this clear boundary? This is what it is. What did you do?
Well, we gathered as much information as we could first. We surveyed all of the families, trying to get a feel for where was the majority? How does everybody feel about masks? And how does everybody feel about being indoors? And we tried to get a real picture of where everybody was so we could make as many accommodations as we could for that. Um, and once we made that call and we relayed the information and feedback started coming in, if it was negative, I had phrases that I would fall back on. We'll get into this in a minute, but there's this concept that I love called AVP, and that means acknowledge, validate, permit. And it's really about feelings. So when people come and they're upset about whatever choice we've made, you acknowledge it. I know this is really tricky. This is not what you wanted to happen. It's okay that you're upset. It makes sense. It's such a tricky time. And whatever choice you make, will support, even if that choice was that they leave the school. We had to be very willing to work with whatever people needed. And then whatever they decided, we really needed to follow through with that and support them and be okay with the fact that people just weren't unhappy. So I think acknowledging and validating feelings is really an important thing when it comes to holding boundaries that were going to be kind of unpopular.
Yeah, and this is something I have learned about a lot from you. So this is going to be a little bit of a different approach in the podcast for a moment. One of the things that I look at as an executive coach when I'm working with someone, there is a moment that I know that the goal is really landing. And it depends on the goal. I don't necessarily see this if someone says, I want to be a better presenter. What I'm looking for is the moment that someone says to me, I had a realization that I could apply this at home, and I did it with my kids, or I did it with my boyfriend, or I was talking with a friend, and it made such a difference. That's when I know the work and the effort on the goal is really starting to become part of them, because so much of leadership is how we treat people. And one of the interesting resources that has surprised me as of late, that I actually think is a great resource for people, is a parenting book and resource that Abby introduced me to. We started at the beginning, this idea that our professional development and who we are trying to be generally can support us at work, and also vice versa. So we know that, and I think most people know that as you have your whole day to practice being a good listener, then hopefully that goes home and that helps as well. The reverse can also be true. So Abby introduced me to this Instagram account called Dr. Becky at Good Inside. She has since become an author. And one of the things that I particularly appreciate about what she does is that she gives a lot of principles, but also phrases. So, Abby, you talked earlier about how in those moments of threat, your amygdala shuts down. And when I was getting certified in crucial conversations, they talked about that being like crocodile brain, meaning if there's really high opinions and they're opposing and the stakes are high, your brain shuts down. And I think this is one of the reasons that when we face challenging moments, it's really hard for us to come up with good lines. We have those moments that we think, why didn't I say that? And it's just because our brain was in protection mode. So I've really appreciated this account because she has some really great one-liners. And as I have followed it, I thought, oh, those are great one-liners for work as well. So we're going to take you through. I pulled 10 really old posts that Dr. Becky had. Abby's going to give you the at-home version, which you might use with kids or with a spouse. And I'm going to give you the work translation. And we thought this might be just helpful for people as they are thinking about conflict or challenging situations. You might hear a one-liner in here that you think, oh, that's really good. So, Abby, do you want to start us off? You'll read the home and I'll do the work side.
Okay. So at home, let's say your kid is feeling upset. And you could say, if it feels like a big deal, it is a big deal.
Same at work. There's times that you see someone who's so passionate about something and it's not really going their way. It's great if you can look at them and say, if it feels important to you, it is important to you. And we have to balance what is needed for the good of everyone. I do acknowledge that it is important to you. We also have to make a different decision.
You actually used another Dr. Becky one in there that I just want to point out, and that's two things are true. It can be true that this is a big deal. This is a big deal to you. And we can't necessarily do all of that. That works at home too. You want to watch more TV and it's time for us to go. Both of those things can be true at the same time.
Okay, let's do number 2.
Everyone struggles. You are not your struggles and you are not alone.
Okay, we all have struggles at work. Let's say you have someone who slips up. I'm not talking about a Bobby Knight coaching moment where they throw a chair across the room. I'm talking about you've accidentally CC'd your whole department. Great line would be, everyone has to learn in their role and everyone grows. I'm not defining you by this moment. Let's talk about how to handle this in the future.
Okay, you don't have to be perfect to be loved.
You don't have to be perfect to be a great employee, or you don't have to be perfect to apply for the next role.
Siblings are arguing and you're managing disagreements that don't involve you, and you may not have seen what was going on. You may have walked into the argument already in process. Wow, there's a lot going on here. I need to take a deep breath.
So, also applicable, director reports. It's important to let team members learn how to work through things because how you respond can either throw fuel on the fire or water on the fire. Similar phrase could be used. Wow, there's a lot going on here. I think we could all use a deep breath. I trust that the two of you can work through this. I will be available if you reach an impasse.
All right. So, what really scares kids? It's not information, it's the lack of information. They're afraid of being alone without all the information.
Same at work. There was a time that I worked for a company where there were layoffs. There was a lack of information. And I'm telling you, we scoured the company documents. We looked at what was happening in the state. And it actually made us way less productive. When we did have moments where people would bring us information, it really calmed things down and helped us move forward.
Okay. I can say no and still show my child compassion and validation.
Same at work. There may be a moment that you have to say, we are not going to promote you this year. And I know that's probably disappointing.
Okay. So teaching kids that they are good inside. Use a powerful phrase like, you didn't want that to happen. But she teaches that you need to start with yourself as a parent first. For example, you're driving home and you hit a ton of traffic. Instead of, why did I go this way? My day is ruined. You could say, oh, I didn't want this to happen. Or your child's building a tower and it falls down. And instead of saying, oh, it's okay, just stow it again and make it sturdier, you could say, you didn't want that to happen. Or your spouse is putting plates away and one falls and it gets chipped. And instead of saying, hey, slow down, you don't want to break all the plates, you say, oh, you didn't want that to happen. So you think you're giving this constructive feedback, but really you just need to be with them or yourself in the feelings.
And it's about looking for positive intent too. So this is a game changer at work. And I want you to put yourselves in the following shoes. Think about you've done a presentation, you've done your best, you've triple checked things, you've worked long hours. You get into the presentation and there's a slide deck or data that's off. And your boss could look at you afterward and say, you got it wrong. They can look at that one detail, or they could start by saying, hey, look, I know you didn't intend that to happen. We need to fix the process. Let's talk about how to do that. That is the type of a leader that garners loyalty and respect. So again, being able to look for that good intent and acknowledge people don't set out to do something crazy.
Kids respond a lot better to that too. All right. So, one of the most important things you can do as a parent is to build your child's independence and self confidence. So, when your kid says, look what I made, instead of saying, wow, that's awesome, good job, you could say, wow, how did you think of that? So, you're expressing interest in the process. So, you're building their independence and self confidence when you do that.
Similarly, at work, building your team's talent is one of the most important roles you have as a leader, or you may also need to boost someone's confidence. So you can use this approach when someone talks to you about what they did in their weekly one-on-one, and you might need to point it out if someone is hesitant to own their wins. So let's say your team member reports, well, I did this and this. You could say, thanks, oh, that's great. Or you could say, well, how did you think about that? By expressing interest in the process, you really start building a couple things. You start developing the team members' independence, which is really important for you as a leader so that you're not micromanaging, and also their self-confidence and their ability to continue to do this in the future.
So, it's important to teach your kids how to think, not what to think. So, for example, nobody likes me. Instead of saying, of course they do. Mia loves you. Sam loves you. You teach them how to think. Thanks for talking to me about this. It's so important. Tell me more about what's been going on.
Similarly, at work, it is also really important to teach your team how to think and not what to think. So here's a great example. Let's say somebody is running a lateral project and they influence their peers, and they come to you and they say, nobody's following through on assignments. It's really easy as a leader to say something like, well, you need to be more direct. You need to give them specific assignments. Instead, you may want to consider doing something like this. Thank you for talking to me about this. I know this is really important. Talk to me about what's going on. The key with this is sometimes as you talk things through, you might find that actually they are being specific, they are giving assignments, but maybe actually the team is confused about what's a priority. So even this conversation and engaging in curiosity can help you support that person in a better way and get better outcomes.
So, the hardest moments for our kids can really be the times for us to have the biggest impact on them. When we lend our calm to our kids' emotional storms, we can be wiring lifelong regulation skills for them. So, let's say you have a really tough moment with your kid and they run to their room and slam the door, and you just want to check out and let them have that moment by themselves. You could sit by your child's door and just whisper, hey, I'm here and you're safe.
Similarly, I think about this a lot that the hardest moments with our team offer us the biggest impact. So when we lend our calm to those big storms that are going on, we are wiring in a culture of regulation skills. So for example, you could avoid topics, you could criticize management, or you could say, you know what? We don't know what will happen, and I will keep you informed and looped in where I can. So let's talk about what we can do to stay steady in these moments where we don't know what's going on and make sure we stay aligned with our vision and our purpose.
So, this last one is I use this all the time. Feelings are your superpower. They are telling you what you care about and what you need.
The translation to this for a business is culture is your superpower. And I think of culture as the underlying emotions or currents of what's happening in a company. And I often think that if we it's like reading the dashboard of a car. So when we see things happening and there's big emotions in a company, we could be frustrated, or we could look at this and say, oh, our engine is overheating. What do we need to do to take care of the car right now? So I think there's some real value in being able to look at what's happening on your team, what's happening with individuals, what's happening in the culture, and be able to take those and leverage it for your strengths. So thank you, everyone listening, for going on that journey with us. I hope that actually gave you some really good one-liners or takeaways as you're in a work scenario. Now, Abby, I'm going to say something that I've heard people say, but they say it and they don't want anyone to know they say it because it's relevant. And this is it. I'm just going to ask people listening, have you ever had a moment that you think, am I working with teenagers or kids? Can we just be adults? Nobody would ever say that to anybody's face. And Abby, you and I had said earlier as we were preparing, we said, this isn't about people behaving like kids. It's about people being human. And how do we treat people well in a way that honors them as humans? You do the work with teenagers in a volunteer capacity. And so you're a volunteer leader in the area teenage in our congregation. You work with the young women or the teenage girls, and you have responsibilities for the once a year summer camp called Girls Camp. You have meetings several times a month. I'm curious what you have learned about leadership in that capacity.
So shortly after I started, I attended a training, and this was by the global leaders of our church. They Zoomed with everybody in the region and were giving this training to us. And one of them challenged us to pray to understand 3 questions. Why me? Why am I specifically? Why have I been given this assignment? Why this? Why have I been given this specific thing to do? And why now? What about me makes all of that fit right now? And it was really an important question for me to be able to reflect on because I don't have kids that age. I feel grossly unqualified for working with kids this age. I have no experience with it since I was that age. So it was very humbling to me to be in this position where I'm working with people who have been doing this kind of thing for years. And yet here I am, and it's like, what do I bring to the table that isn't already covered multiple times over by all of you? So I really needed to reflect on those questions. And once I figured out answers to those questions, it really made me a much more confident leader. It's made me a lot more effective because I feel like now I have direction in what I do when I'm working directly with these girls or when I'm working with my team to plan things. I'm much more likely to have something to contribute. And I feel like I'm a lot more involved because now I see purpose in the role that I have. So I would just say for anybody that's in a leader position, see if you can answer those 3 questions. Why me? Why this? And why now? I think it can really apply to anybody in any leadership role.
And you've seen this also play out at work.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. So while I was letting those questions percolate, I did I guess sort of an exercise with my work team. So the work that I do is about supporting moms. And there's a lot of that you see in the way we manage our team. We're trying to support each other as well because we're all working moms. So we did this exercise where we all took a little survey and figured out what your working genius was. And one of mine was tenacity, which was not a surprise. That was very clear to me that that was a contribution that I made. And the other one was enablement. And the description when I read it says, even though people with enablement are often ideal team members, they sometimes discount the importance of their genius, mistakenly believing that they are simply amenable or nice. The benefits of this genius include higher morale and greater interpersonal appreciation and support. And that kind of made the last piece click in for me with my volunteer work that I do with all these teenage girls. I may not have a bunch of big ideas, or I may not be as much of a go-getter as some of these people on my team are, but that's their working genius. And those are important contributions that they make. And this is an important contribution that I make. I build up the teams. I support them. I bring that to the group. So that was it. It was just one more thing that helped to give me direction and confidence in my work.
I appreciate this example on a personal level from the perspective of just knowing how many times I have spoken to women about coming onto the podcast. And there are so many times that women will say to me, "Oh, I don't know that I have that much to contribute." And I think we've confused the idea of wisdom or learned experience with perfection. Almost this idea that to contribute something meaningful, I need to be perfect. I need to have a title, or I need to have this, or I need to have that. And when we think about Jesus Christ, he didn't have a title. He wasn't described as this really handsome guy that was super strong, that everybody thought was going to lead a war. He was out with people who were poor, and he was out there doing good. And I think that's a good reminder for all of us that as we think about what makes a good leader, it isn't your title, it isn't how you look. It is so much about how you show up and who you are and how you impact people. Abby, you have a lot on your plate. You've got a leadership role at work, at multiple companies. You are leading at church. And of course, you have a leadership role in home as a mother. How do you balance everything that is on your plate?
I don't know if I really do balance it, but I felt very strongly about leaving the workforce when my kids were born to be home with my kid. That was a very clear decision that I made. And when these roles came up, it was also very clear to me. I felt very guided that this is where I am needed right now. It was not the timing I expected. And it means that, yes, I have so much more on my plate right now, but I love all of it. And I don't want to let any of it go. So there really is a lot for me to balance. And every day I pray about what I need to prioritize. I have to be very intentional about on any given day, what am I giving my limited available time to? And I have to be very prayerful about it because it's so easy to just respond to the loudest thing, the thing that's the most demanding my attention, or even the thing that I would like most to focus on. That might not be the thing that matters the most that day. And I only have so much bandwidth to go around. I will not get to everything on my list in a day. And I need that direction to help me to know which thing is it today? Which direction do I need to go today? What's going to be my focus? So I can do the most good with the time I have today.
As you have that experience, what are some of the things that you are learning about life and what a successful life looks like for you?
Well, I would say the most important thing for me right now is connection. Specifically, really, it's connection with my family. So I have all of these things and they're pulling me away. And I've watched the reaction of my family to me having these bigger demands on my time. And that's really been what's motivated me to trim wherever I can, to really focus wherever I can, to compartmentalize my life as much as I can so that when I need to be present for these people that are the most important people to me in the world, I can do that. I can be that for them. I can be focused on them and I can be present. And that's whatever else I do. It's important to me. It fulfills me. And that is giving me energy so that I can have more of me to give to my family.
Abby, thank you so much for joining us today and talking with us about. I think the big theme here is how do we manage these moments of conflict, this big emotion? How do we respond to people in a way that really honors them for their humanity. And I keep thinking about that example that we had earlier, that when you have a boss or a manager or a leader who can look at you and say, I know you didn't mean to do that. Let's help you get through. It does garner so much loyalty and so much commitment and really great team dynamics. I, as we always do, like to give my guests an opportunity to close with a message of hope or encouragement for others so that they can start their day off on a great foot. What would you say? What would be your words of encouragement or support?
I would just say that you are enough. I know I'm not unique as a mother in feeling like I am stretched thin and that I don't have enough bandwidth to do it all. I remember being single with a career and wondering how there were not enough hours in the day. I remember when I was single, I painted the walls of my bedroom sky blue because there was a stretch of the year where I never saw the sun. I know I am not alone in feeling like there is just not enough time to do everything. And I want you to know that you can't do it all, but you're doing enough and you are enough exactly as you are.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I hope that you have felt encouraged and uplifted. And a special thank you to Dr. Becky at Good Insights Instagram account. This is not a paid, I don't know what it's called, but we are not paid to go through and do that. But we'll drop that link below in the YouTube channel and also in our email notes. As always, thank you for listening. Subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or your favorite listening apps. Please share this if it was helpful to you. And I hope that you have a wonderful day.